Advice is a rather strange thing, and personally, I've never been a huge fan of doling it out, but there are reasons for this. For one, most people don't listen to advice. For two, these days, in the context of the online environment, much of the advice is self serving and is not really meant to aid anyone other than the person giving the advice, i.e., lining their pockets. So, my motto for quite some time has been the worst vice is advice. And I think there are a few areas in life where this isn't more true than in the quote unquote market of relationship advice, which is really an umbrella term that encompasses everything you can imagine, from women's magazines telling women what they need to do to quote unquote red pill content telling men what they need to do. And it just runs the gamut of pretty much everything. Human beings are out there constantly and perpetually doling out relationship advice. And the idea behind it is if you apply what they're telling you, then you'll get a nice relationship. Or if you're already in a relationship, that's what you need to do to make it work. Because there's another type of advice you'll encounter, usually from people in long-term relationships, marriages that have lasted decades, saying, well, we did this, and my parents did that, and that sort of thing. And some of it is well-intended, particularly the latter category. I don't think the other categories usually are. They're meant more to manipulate and, as I said, to line the pockets of the individuals involved giving the advice. But there's a fundamental problem with relationship advice. Now, not every aspect of it, and in order to unravel that, I think it helps to make use of an analogy. Think about diet and training, say in the gym. There are some very broad guidelines that probably everyone would benefit from when it comes to diet, right? So, for example, a diet consisting solely of Pringles, Oreos, and gummy bears. There are probably some people on Earth that could deal better with that type of diet than others, but almost no one's to really benefit from that type of diet. So you probably don't want to consume a diet of Pringles, Oreos, and gummy bears. It's just universally bad. In the same sense as a relationship where both people are hitting each other constantly is probably universally bad too. Very, very broad general guidelines like that can in fact work, but they're kind of obvious. But then again, you don't need to be a dietitian or a nutrition expert that a steady diet of gummy bears, Pringles, and Oreos is not the best thing for you, any more than you need to be a relationship expert to realize that hitting each other constantly is not a good thing. But when you dive into the details, getting beyond the sort of Oreo, Pringle, gummy bear diet, as an individual, there's a lot of variation. What's the best diet for you? Well, everyone's trying to peddle that, but the variation comes from genetics. Some people are better at processing carbohydrates. Some people can deal with saturated fat better and still have decent blood results, and other people can't. It really varies quite a bit. Extremely so, to be perfectly honest. And this is a recurrent theme, obviously, but your genes are going to dictate a lot of things, and they also dictate huge portions of your personality. Why do I mention this? Because personality is essential to pretty much any human interaction you're going to have. Especially true of relationships. Now, recall I had that conversation with Alex Dateside. We talked a little bit about personality. It's something that people rarely talk about, and to the extent that they do, they usually talk about it as if it were the most malleable thing out there. But personality isn't malleable, especially not as an adult. Now, why am I mentioning this? Well, because generally speaking, when people are giving you guidelines, right, they say, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, you follow them. And then you wonder, despite following these guidelines to a T, how it didn't work out for you. Now, usually what the giver advice will say then is, well, you didn't actually follow them the right way, kind of like a no true Scotsman. But maybe you actually did. Maybe you tracked everything. Say with a diet, maybe you followed the perfect version of keto to a T for months, and you felt like crap. It's entirely possible. It happens all the time. It means that the diet wasn't the right diet for you. This kind of applies to relationships too. People have their methods and their tricks, A, for getting to relationships, and B, more importantly, for maintaining relationships. And this really is the heart of the matter and what I'm talking about. Maintaining long-term relationships or marriages is not something that everyone can do because of the differences, genetic differences in personalities that divide us. Again, that group of people who have been married for 30, 40 years and their parents were, it's no surprise. Guess what? Long-term relationship stability has a large heritable component, which means that successive generations of families that are in long-term, stable marriages and relationships, they replicate themselves, and a lot of it is down to genes. And the same is true of divorce and relationship dysfunction. Divorce has a large heritable component, just as pretty much any other personality trait might. So yes, whilst there are instances of children of divorce bucking that trend, usually they don't. And why is that? Well, probably largely due to genetic influence. The functionality of a relationship and how two personalities, which are fundamentally different, work with each other and cooperate is down to your personality, i.e. your genes that inform that personality. So if you have a successful couple saying, well, you need to do this and that, maybe you're not inclined towards that. Maybe, for example, you have a particular quirk of personality that makes you less attentive than the individuals involved. And because you're less attentive, you're probably not going to be able to get the same results, all things being equal. So at the core of all of this is the inapplicability of most advice across the board, actually throughout life, because of variance in genetics, personality, etc., but specifically in the relationship marriage realm, because people are always trying to sell you something, especially these days. You need to do this. Now, there's some people out there that are reasonably intelligent about this. Take, for example, the famous streamer called Destiny. This guy is in an open relationship, but he explicitly says most people, I think I'm almost quoting here, something like 99% of people shouldn't do what he's doing. It works for him and his wife, apparently, but most people would not have a functional relationship with that sort of constellation. And he's aware of that, and therefore he tells people, don't do this, it's a bad idea for the vast majority of people. That's kind of advice that you actually can listen to, I think, because he's not telling you to do specific things, he's telling you not to do something. It's a lot easier to not do things, as a rule, than it is to do things. Don't touch the hot stove if you don't want to get burned. Not too difficult, usually, right? Human difference is very important because it dictates life outcomes. What are the chances that a constellation of personalities coming together that seems to work in a particular way can be effectively and efficiently replicated by other people when we know that everyone's personality is going to be somewhat distinct, when we know there are going to be other distinctions? Pretty slim, I think, the chances are. And this really applies to everything when it comes to relationships. You'll hear all the time, go to church. Okay, what if you're completely irreligious? Why would you go to church if you're completely irreligious? And it makes you feel uncomfortable being around highly religious people. Would you then go to church? Well, I guess you could. So there's so many incongruities in people's quote-unquote sage advice when it comes to relationships, marriage, etc., or human interactions in general, that it all amounts to just being pretty useless. And this applies to friendships too. I had a good friend who just out of the blue went MIA sometime last year, a little over a year ago, despite repeated attempts on my end to contact him. And then he'd say, oh, I'm sorry, I've been busy with work. That was only partly true. He was busy with work, but not that busy. And, you know, when you get personality differences, I'm very attentive in my friendships typically, and he wasn't particularly, and you cannot premeditatively select all the details of personalities in another person, let alone you, because, you know, you didn't choose your parents, unfortunately. So how are you going to make sure that that constellation is going to work? And then on top of all of that, bring in the advice of other people that are completely different from you genetically and telling you need to do X, Y, and Z. It just doesn't make sense. Now, maybe this is a bit of a black pill, but it's kind of true. Like everything in life, relationship success, whether they last a long time or don't, how often you fight, whether the individuals cheat or not, etc., etc. It all comes down to largely dumb luck. The constellation of personalities interacting with each other, if you get really lucky, can, yes, in some rare cases, yield results such as 30, 40, 50-year marriages, even in today's day and age, but I don't think anyone should count on that. You get lucky in some ways, and you don't get lucky in other ways. And relationships, unfortunately, unlike diet, which you have some control over, assuming you have enough money to spend, are very difficult to pick and choose and mix and match in the same way. So whereas you can try keto out for a few months, and then try high carb, and then try vegan, and then try vegetarian, and then try Mediterranean, that's not usually how it works with relationships. And of course, I think this is true, otherwise I wouldn't be telling you this, but it doesn't make people money. If you want to sell a course on relationship advice and tactics and strategies, or you want to sell magazines, the case of Women's BS and all the other names, then you need to come up with things and you need to make it believable and you need to make sure that people actually believe you and try different things. People are very, very unaware of their own intuitions, but also about how the world interacts with them and vice versa. The other day, for example, I was sharing a video with a friend of a prairie dog that appeared to be domesticated, at least partly, although they are wild animals, rodents, that clearly was in a defensive, agitated stance. But if you looked at the comment section, it was filled with normies who couldn't read the body language whatsoever, and I'm hardly an expert on prairie dogs. This prairie dog was having a great time. He loves being petted. He loves this. When you could see how agitated he was. His mouth was agape. His claws were at the ready. He was not having a good time. People don't pay attention. They see something, they go with the flow. The title of the video was something like Happy Prairie Dog Enjoying Scratchies or something like that, right? Okay, that leads people down a certain route and then just run with it rather than looking at the evidence. So does it make sense that people fall for all kinds of really crappy relationship advice all the time that is wholly inapplicable to their personality phenotype and their genotype in general? Well, it doesn't surprise you, but it's asinine. But yeah, people need to make a buck, so they're going to keep on telling you, you need to do this, you need to do that. And again, everyone is different. Some people thrive on keto, some people do terribly. And the same is true of relationships. And unfortunately, as I said, they're not like diet. You can't pre-plan it, you can't change it up. It's not a hopeful message, but it is a realistic one. As always, thank you for tuning in. Special thanks to my patrons as always. You guys are the best. You keep the channel going. And if you can do the usual YouTube jazz, like the video, subscribe if you're not yet a subscriber, comment, share the video with other people. Much appreciated. And if I'm still alive, I will check you out later. Until then, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.